This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. When it comes to Deshaun Watson, everybody seems to have their mind made up on a situation where I feel like there's just not enough information to have your mind made up in any direction. Nonetheless, with the conviction that some people seem to have their mind made up with, I try to keep things as honest and fair as possible when I talk about the Browns. In this situation, no one is concerned with being honest or fair. So anything I say about Watson is either perceived as an attack from diehard Watson fans who feel like they have to defend any critique about Deshaun Watson, or it gets perceived as a defense of Deshaun Watson. It's exhausting. I just want to talk about football, and Deshaun Watson, whether people like it or not, is a big part of the football that's going to be happening with the Cleveland Browns this upcoming season. When it comes to the football, and when it comes to Deshaun Watson and the football, there is only one conclusion we can really come to. And that conclusion is we don't have enough information. Whatever you want to throw out there, whether it be a positive Watson take or a negative Watson take, whether you want to say Deshaun Watson is going to be in the MVP candidacy next year, which I don't hear a lot of people saying, or you're saying Deshaun Watson's injury prone or cooked, right? I've heard that a lot. We don't have enough information to make a determination either way. If you want to know what I mean by that, let's go with the injury prone thing, right? If you want to make a point that he's injury prone by stating that he's only played in 12 games in 2 years, that statement is just straight up misleading, because lumping in the suspension as if it were an injury is dumb. I am not worried about if Deshaun Watson gets suspended again. That is not a risk the Cleveland Browns really have to worry about, because if Deshaun Watson gets suspended again, they can cut him, wipe their hands of the contract, and just move on to the next thing. That's really it. It's not they're going to be stuck with him for 3 more years despite he got through another. He's just going to be off the team. If Deshaun Watson gets suspended again for something similar to what he got suspended for the first time, the 30 allegations of sexual assault, he's not playing football anymore. So lumping the suspension in with the injuries is not really intellectually honest. No matter how somebody tries to spin it, cut it up. It's just not the same thing. When it comes to actual injury during the course of Watson's NFL career, the thing that we usually use to determine whether a player is actually injury prone or not, Deshaun Watson does not have a history of being injury prone. He tore his ACL his rookie year in 2017. He recovered from that injury and was healthy for 50 straight games after that. Then he sat out the 2021 season because of a contract dispute, came back into the league in 2022, was suspended by the league for 11 games, came back, played 6 games for the Cleveland Browns after a 700-day layoff, and then came back, played 3 games in a row for the Cleveland Browns. He was healthy and active for almost 60 straight games. That is not injury prone. There is no way you can flip his injury history into being injury prone. If you say Watson has a history of injury, it's a very misleading statement, and it's not true. Now, on the flip side of that, if you have concerns about Watson's injury potential going forward, that's not something that's completely invalid. Every player's risk of injury goes up as they get older. And also Deshaun Watson's style of play does give you some concerns about his ability to stay healthy going forward. But again, he does not have a history of being injury prone. And while those things do exist, right, that would make you be a little bit skeptical of his ability to stay healthy, you cannot make it out as if he's injury prone, because he's not been injury prone. Now, if Deshaun Watson does not play for 8 games this year or more, or misses a significant chunk of the season this year because of injury, then that changes. But right now, we do not have enough information to say that Deshaun Watson is injury prone. It's just not a reasonable assumption right now. We don't have enough information. Another example of a take that we really don't have enough information on, like, is Deshaun Watson washed after sitting out for 2 years? Now, again, there are some compelling reasons to believe that Deshaun Watson could be washed. His advanced stats in a lot of areas, his traditional stats in a lot of areas, have not been what they were when Deshaun Watson was in Houston since returning in 2022. That is an objective fact. No matter how much you cut it up, flip it, slip it, slide it, run it, turn it, those numbers have not reached the same level of fidelity that they were at in Houston prior to being traded to the Cleveland Browns. But the issue with that argument is that the sample of stats that we are pulling from is just not sufficient to pull any real conclusions from yet. Yes, he's played 12 games, but yeah, remember, 6 of them came after a 2-year hiatus from playing live football at the quarterback position. It's something that's unprecedented, and there's nothing really similar outside of Mike Vick going to jail to compare it to. And even then, that's a completely different era of quarterback play. The other 6 games are from a sample where he played 3 games, hurt his throwing shoulder, came back early for a quarter, got pulled after that quarter, then missed another game, came back and hurt his throwing shoulder again. Again, it is true. The sample of statistics from these games are not amazing. But you have to acknowledge the circumstances surrounding the sample are extraordinary. And that makes using his sample of stats in Cleveland to illustrate a point of a definitive physical decline or whatever decline for Deshaun Watson insufficient. He needs at least, and I emphasize, at least 8 straight games in a row to have a good sample that anybody could really feel good about drawing conclusions from. And even that wouldn't be great. When it comes to Deshaun Watson and who he is after he was traded from Houston, we need more information. We just don't have good enough information to make any conclusion yet, positive or negative. I don't think it's fair to judge Deshaun Watson exclusively by the work that he does coming in and out of a throwing shoulder injury or off of a 700-day hiatus. That's not a fair way to judge any player. With Baker Mayfield, for example, for those of you who I know are going to bring him up, I literally waited until the end of year 4 to make a conclusion based on the 4 years of games that Baker Mayfield provided. With Deshaun Watson, we're talking about 12 game samples that are very inconsistent. It's just not enough. We need more information to be conclusive about any kind of conclusion you want to draw about how this is going. A lot of people make assumptions about how I feel about Deshaun Watson as the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. I hear people make up takes about what they think I feel all the time. Oh, Q hates Watson. Oh, Q is a Watson fan. Here's what I think about Deshaun Watson. He's a quarterback who's still in his prime years for his position. He's a former 3-time Pro Bowler who has had a top 5 passing season in the NFL and has led a team to 2 playoff appearances and 1 playoff victory. Watson also is a quarterback who has not put up the numbers or accolades like he has in 2020. Even in the 2023 season, where I think his sample is better than a lot of people give it credit for, it's not on that same MVP caliber that he was playing at in 2020. So there is a lot to prove for Deshaun Watson. The player that they traded for has not really showed up yet, whether that be because of a physical decline, whether that be because of misuse by his coaching staff, whether that be a combination of suspension or freak injury that made him or put him in a position where he can never return to peak form, or whether this 12-game sample was just a bump in the road for what will eventually become top 10, top 5, or MVP level quarterback play in the future. All of that is unknown because the sample that we have is way too incomplete for me to make a definitive conclusion on, because we need more information. So there it is. If you've ever wondered how I felt about Deshaun Watson as a football player or assumed in either direction, that is the answer. That is the answer until he gets a good sample of games under his belt. I need 8 games in 10 weeks. And if he can't give you 8 games in 10 weeks in 2024, then you know that there's an injury concern that you ought to take seriously. Either way, again, we will know by this year. So that brings me to a comment that I saw in the comment section, by the way, of the week 12 rewatch, a game where the Browns play the Denver Bronco, a game where DTR is the starting quarterback, a game in a video that I spend half of it talking about the Browns run defense and the other half of it talking about DTR's struggles as a quarterback. Definitely wasn't the topic of the video, but this is the topic of the comment about Deshaun Watson. And the reason I bring this up is because whether you find this to be unhinged or not, this is basically like the stock argument outside of like one sentence that I hear most people make with Deshaun Watson. Comment goes on to say, and I'm not going to highlight the commenter's name for obvious reasons here, but the comment goes on to say, if we were talking about left tackles, for example, or any other position, if we said our left tackle allowed the 3rd most sacks in the NFL and is amongst the worst at run blocking, would anybody be defending him? When Cade York was our kicker, we all wanted him gone, right? He was barely average, not terrible, just not good. It's an interesting way to characterize Cade York. Watson ranks below Ritter and Pickett in everything. Averages to a game 184 yards, and his QBR is 41. If he was white, this wouldn't be a conversation, and nobody will tell me any different. I don't care who likes it or not. Those are facts. We traded for him to be a huge upgrade over Baker Mayfield and not step down. So I don't want to hear the comparisons. Let's actually engage with the less ridiculous parts of this comment and talk about it. Now, the first part of this comment is, if we were talking about a left tackle, for example, any other position, if we say our left tackle was allowed the 3rd most sacks in the NFL and is among the worst at run blocking, would anybody be defending him? This is the hypothetical question that this commenter chose to throw at me. The issue with this hypothetical is this isn't as if the Browns traded for a random left tackle. This is like if the Browns traded for Laremy Tunsil, for example, right? A former Pro Bowl tackle known for being one of the best tackles in the NFL. But we traded for Laremy Tunsil, and he played about 12 games in 2 years due to a suspension that we knew he was going to get when we traded for him and an injury that happened in the middle of his 2nd year. I would feel like it's safe to assume that if we traded for Laremy Tunsil, there would be a lot of Browns fans who would think that Laremy Tunsil would be able to get back to form as long as he stays healthy and stays away from any off the field trouble. that really wouldn't be a crazy assumption. I really would love to throw that hypothetical back at whoever commented this video. That is the hypothetical. And if you did take Watson away from it, I don't think anybody would have any difficulty understanding why you would feel like, hey, this guy stays healthy. There's a chance he returns to form and plays very well. But there's really a chance that you can have a high ceiling. See, when people point that out with Deshaun Watson, they're not defending Deshaun Watson as much as they are just pointing out that he has a history of success in the NFL, which is objectively true. He is still an age where a decline is not expected for his position. Again, another thing that's objectively true. And if there were a left tackle of a similar pedigree that the Browns had traded for, yes, fans would definitely point that out, and they would be right to, because those things are significant to consider. Now, he has a whole thing about if this was white, if he was a white guy, it wouldn't even be a conversation. So I would just like to point out that this part of his comment comes on a video where I spend like 25 minutes tearing DTR and Russell Wilson apart. So I think that's hilarious, me personally, but to each his own. Okay, now this last part of the comment is something that I do agree with. We traded for him to be a huge upgrade from Baker, not a step down. That is a fair point. That is a fair point. That is a point I agree with. That's a point that I make consistently. I've said since the day that the trade was made, Deshaun Watson and Drew Berry in this trade will be judged by how high the Browns' ceiling is, while Deshaun Watson is the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. If when Deshaun Watson is healthy and the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, you feel like they can be a Super Bowl contender, then they broke through, right? If they get through the second round consistently, if they get to an AFC championship game, if they get to a Super Bowl, if they win a Super Bowl, if they become that next tier of contender, which is not something that they could break out of with Baker Mayfield, or that Baker Mayfield has proven that he is capable of breaking out of yet, even in Tampa Bay, then the trade is worth it because your ceiling has been risen. But if you're just another good team and you have playoff exits like you had last year with Joe Flacco, where you get bounced in the first round, or maybe you make it to a second round, but you get bounced by like Kansas City, and you're just not able to ever really get over the hump, even with Deshaun Watson, you feel like your quarterback puts a ceiling on the team, then that's not a successful trade. That is the bar that Deshaun Watson deserves to be judged by, and will ultimately be judged by, at least by the people here in Cleveland. So again, that's a fair point. I look at this as if he should raise the ceiling from what it was with Baker Mayfield. With Baker Mayfield, the ceiling of the Cleveland Browns was a second round exit. It's also worth pointing out that the Browns did not trade for Deshaun Watson to have him on the team for 2 years. They traded for Deshaun Watson to have Deshaun Watson on the team, presumably at least 5 years with the guaranteed contract, if not more years. Now, if Deshaun Watson plays well enough to earn a contract extension in Cleveland, if Deshaun Watson at any point gets to a Super Bowl or wins a Super Bowl, let alone win like a Super Bowl MVP or anything like that, at any point in his Cleveland Browns career, the trade is a success. Unless like he gets cut and then brought back or something weird like that. But as long as he's on this run of the Cleveland Browns, if he does that, the trade is a success, which is to say that this trade is going to be judged over the length of Deshaun Watson's career with the Cleveland Browns. The reason we can talk about what went wrong, what was a failure with Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos, is because Russell Wilson no longer plays for the Denver Broncos. Same reason we could talk about the Trey Lance trade is because Trey Lance does not play for the San Francisco 49ers anymore. With the Watson trade, this thing is going to be judged continuously as long as Watson is the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. And if the ceiling of the Cleveland Browns is not risen from second round exit type team while Watson is the quarterback, then this trade is a failure. But if that ceiling does rise, if this team does become a legitimate Super Bowl contender, then the trade is worth it They got what they wanted out of it, and that is what it is. That's the bar for the trade. If you want to ask me, do I think that Deshaun Watson can be a top 5 quarterback or a top 10 quarterback? Yeah, it's on the table. I had Jake Burns on. We both rewatched the Deshaun Watson games that he played last year, and we both came to a similar conclusion that we felt like those samples of games were pretty underrated when you look at the tape. The stats don't really tell the story on those games specifically, and there's a chance he returns to form, a solid chance, a pretty damn good chance that he returns to form. We both came to that conclusion after rewatching those games. So yeah, it could happen. It's definitely on the table. If you want to ask me if Watson lost something in that 2-year hiatus and he'll never get back to top 10, top 5 form, I think that's also on the table. I don't know if it's on the table equally as the other option, but it's certainly a possibility. There are no definitive answers yet with Deshaun Watson. A lot of his future hinges on what happens this year. I think we just have to accept 2 things. One, the 12-game sample he has provided has too many extraordinary factors surrounding it to make definitive conclusions on. It's just not good enough of a sample. We need something else. We need him to have a more normal sample. Again, I don't even need him to play in 8 straight games. Just playing like 8 games out of 10 weeks in a football season, something normal like that, right? But because of the suspension in 2022 and because of the injury in 2023, we just have not gotten that. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. The second thing we also have to accept is that his work pre-2021 is too far away to make any conclusions on where Deshaun Watson stands in today's NFL. I see a lot of times when Deshaun Watson gets ranked at 16 or 20, people get outraged at that. There's no definitive place to put Deshaun Watson. You could put Deshaun Watson at 32. You could put Deshaun Watson at 5. There's no definitive place. His best work is too far away to make definitive conclusions about what's going to happen in 2024. And the work that he's put out recently, it's too damaged of a sample to make any definitive conclusions on. You can put him anywhere. I honestly just wouldn't rank Deshaun Watson in a list like that because there's no good way to rank him right now. Like there's not enough information to put a good ranking on where Deshaun Watson stands because we don't know where Deshaun Watson stands because he has not played enough to have a great conclusion on. There is no reason to be definitive either way on Deshaun Watson. We've rewatched the season. We've talked with other people who've rewatched the season. We've come to as good of a conclusion that we can come to given what we've had to watch, right? 12 games, all of the samples of those games, pretty damn tainted, right? Hard to make a conclusion from those 12 games. From what I've seen in those, he's a quarterback who's still in his prime years for his position. He's a former 3-time Pro Bowler who has had a top 5 passing season in the NFL and has led a team to 2 playoff appearances and 1 playoff victory. Watson also is a quarterback who has not put up the numbers or accolades like he has in 2020. Even in the 2023 season, where I think his sample is better than a lot of people give it credit for, it's not on that same MVP caliber that he was playing at in 2020. So there is a lot to prove for Deshaun Watson. The player that they traded for has not really showed up yet, whether that be because of a physical decline, whether that be because of misuse by his coaching staff, whether that be a combination of suspension or freak injury that made him or put him in a position where he can never return to peak form, or whether this 12-game sample was just a bump in the road for what will eventually become top 10, top 5, or MVP level quarterback play in the future. All of that is unknown because the sample that we have is way too incomplete for me to make a definitive conclusion on because we need more information. You know, with this video, I legitimately hope that the people who are open to listening about Deshaun Watson are willing to listen to what I'm actually saying. I know there's always going to be people who are going to be in bad faith or just say kind of crazy shit in general because they disagree with me. But, you know, I'm not really speaking to those people. Those people aren't going to change their mind. But there are a lot of people who watch these and maybe they don't comment, or maybe they do comment, or maybe they don't really know how they feel about Deshaun Watson. I hope this video could be of help, because I feel like everybody is telling you that you should feel great about Deshaun Watson, or that you should feel horrible about Deshaun Watson. And nobody is coming and telling you the truth, which is it's okay to not know how you feel about Deshaun Watson, because that's exactly where you should be with Deshaun Watson. You shouldn't know, because we don't know, because of all the things that I talked about in this video. That is the point of this video for me, and the inspiration that spurred this. I hope you guys enjoy it. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.